Hi, everybody. Thanks for carving out some time today to talk with us. So basically, this is the next kind of webinar in our education series based on the book They Ask, They Answer, Are You Answer by Marcus Sheridan. We aim to demystify questions that are relevant to you. And today's topic is how to scale professional service organizations with confidence. And we'll show you how we've done that with money.com PSA. Oops. My name is Matt Henderson, and I'm the co-founder and managing partner of Kolme Group. We are a consulting company based out of Arizona. We started in 2017, and our focus is to really help organizations get better at project management, deliver better projects. And so we do that a variety of ways. We help with PM tools. We help that with maturity, best practice consulting, training, things like that. So basically our deal is to give you an idea of how you can deliver projects better and more effectively. And even though we partner with some of the biggest PM tools out there like ClickUp and Monday and Smartsheet and Planview, we try to take more of an agnostic approach. So sometimes you need a tool and sometimes you may not need a tool based on your situation. So we work with you individually to understand your use case and how what your needs are and help you pick the right solution for your needs. Today, we're going to be focusing on a few things. So we're going to talk about the revenue forecasting challenge, look at what a strong forecasting strategy looked like, understanding how technology plays a role in revenue forecasting, show the money.com PSA financial core application and a demo, and really focusing on just talking about the revenue challenges that rec services companies or teams have. Our objectives, recognize the tipping point. What I mean by that is a lot of organizations start using Excel, right, to basically manage their financials. For years and years and years, I used Excel in a lot of organizations I was at. But when does Excel not become a liability for you, right? So when's it not really good? When do you have to look for a different solution, like a tool, to help you understand and help you track revenue more accurately for your organization? You know, understanding how a tool could help, and understanding again some of the challenges that you're probably seeing day to day, but other challenges maybe you're not thinking about. And then lastly, kind of see how money.com PSA could potentially solve the problem for you. So as I mentioned, Kolme Group was founded in 2017. By myself and Kim Astrup. The name Kolme is actually finished for three because there's three founders that started the company. And kind of the impetus of the company is that Kim and I were managing PMOs on opposite continents. So I was managing a PMO for a company in North America. Kim was managing a PMO for a company in Europe. And basically, he ran into challenges with revenue and went through a process to look at tools and found a tool. And as we kind of go through the process of went through the tool, we are like, wow, light bulbs kind of flew off and said, hey, we can do this for other organizations to really help them because we're seeing a lot of value out of it. So that's how Kolme came apart. I wanted to kind of start off with just kind of setting the stage. There's so much information out there about PM tools, and I actually kind of went through a process a little while ago to look at the different project management tools out in the marketplace, and I stopped at 352. I was just tired of writing on it, writing my spreadsheet, but that's a lot. So, you know, there's a lot of options, a lot of different capabilities and focuses on industry and things like that. So what's the right tool for you? And I know everybody doesn't have time to go through looking at 350 tools to see what the tool is right for them. And then also, it doesn't help that there's tons of acronyms out there, right? So we're going to talk about 4 different acronyms today. So the first one is PPM. I kind of, let's say this is kind of a more legacy kind of acronym. It's basically a software solution to help you manage projects, right? So it comes with like resource management, some light financials, things like that. So a lot of tools kind of fall in that category. Like Sloxis, Smartsheet is kind of a PPM tool, and Reiki. PSA, I would say, is more focused on professional services organizations that sell time or sell services for money. So a lot of those tools have more complicated or more grandiose features around resource management, capacity planning, revenue forecasting, actual revenue, timekeeping, things like that. So kind of the things that really are interesting to a service organization. And there's tools like Contata, Certinia, ConnectWise. There's another tool, Big Time, I think is. And so those are tools that really focus on that kind of niche in the marketplace. SPM and CWM are kind of newer terms, I think, and it's really kind of are driven by some of the Gartner hype cycles that they publish. And so SPM is more strategic portfolio manager or project management. And these are kind of higher end tools, more enterprise class. A lot of the things they deal with is, you know, tying goals and OKRs, and a lot of complexity and scenario planning, right? To really understand how different things can affect your organization based on different decisions you make. Tools like Planisware, Planview, and ServiceNow fall in that category. Most SPM tools that I work with are pretty expensive, right? And kind of a little bit more complicated because they're so they have so many capabilities to them. So to implement them takes a little bit of time and effort. CWM is more like work management, collaborative work management. Working on tasks, collaboration. Working with maybe internal and external task workers. Really kind of focused on the usability and just getting it into users' hands so they can manage projects and manage their work. A lot of CWM tools are like Monday.com, ClickUp, Asana, Trello, things like that. So they're kind of all over the place. What we are seeing in the marketplace is CWM tools are kind of adding more capabilities. And I would say these capabilities are, maybe not to the tune of like standalone applications. Like for example, Monday has Monday CRM, which is a pretty, a good add-on. It's not word for word or exactly like Salesforce, for example, but it does a lot of the capabilities that Salesforce does, which is probably good enough for a lot of users, right? To a lot of organizations. And I know ClickUp does the same thing with chat, for example. So, these tools are kind of adding functionalities to kind of give you the ability to kind of work in one app and give you the data that you need for your organization to be effective in working and managing projects. So why is revenue forecasting important? So obviously there's a lot of obvious answers here, effectively planning budgets, resources, identifying financial risks early, predictable cash flow, which your CFO is probably really happy for, and help you make better decisions. But what are some other factors that may not be so as obvious? So one for me is less stress, right? So basically, if I have a predictable way to forecast revenue, then I'm not getting the CFO, the CIO kind of knocking on my door saying, "What's wrong? Why is the revenue numbers off for this month?" Because I have a more predictable process to give me the idea of what my revenue is going to be. So less stress for me. Next thing is data integrity, right? So if you're copying data from spreadsheets to spreadsheets, prone to user error, right? And so even in a spreadsheet, typing the data in could be user error as well. So data integrity is important. Consistency and reliability, right? So you have one source of truth, which is really important. So you've got all the data in one system or in a connected system, then you're not looking at, email, Slack, spreadsheets, PowerPoint slides, et cetera, to get the information you need. It's all in one system. And lastly, I would say credibility. And what I mean by that is that if you consistently provide a revenue forecast that's close, right, it's pretty good, and you meet expectations, then you build credibility for your management team and your executive team. But if you keep on missing it, then like, what's going on? Aren't you managing your projects? Aren't you managing your team? They start questioning other things maybe about your role or what you're doing because you can't get what they think is probably simple numbers are correct. But I know getting numbers correct is a very complex process because I've lived through it, and I know most of you lived through it too. So we're just trying to make it a little bit easier for you. So I mentioned earlier a tipping point. So a lot of organizations start using Excel, which is fine, right? Excel's a pretty useful tool. So what's the point to get to where it's no longer right? The no longer kind of the tool for you. And a lot of the things I already kind of mentioned is like the data integrity is a piece of it, right? So making sure that you have accurate data, the consistency and reliability and the credibility of the numbers you give. And lastly, I guess is the time. Like how long does it take you to pull this together on a weekly basis? And it could take a couple hours. It could take more than a couple hours. I've seen organizations where it's almost a person's full-time job of just making sure the revenue was correct week over week. I have a story. I worked for a client for a while. And help them. And I was kind of in charge of the call, which is what we call it. So basically the revenue call for services every 2 weeks that went up to the CEO and CFO and eventually went to kind of guidance to the marketplace because it was a public company. So I would literally start my process on a Friday, right? So Friday timekeeping was due. So making sure people put their time into the system. Monday, again, making sure people put time in the system. Tuesday, Wednesday, talking to PMs, modifying numbers, looking at forecasts, looking at actuals, kind of seeing what the duration of the project, if it's changed, if it's slipped. If we had change orders, things like that, kind of looking at all these massive spreadsheets. There's a main one, and every PM had their own, right? So kind of looking at all these spreadsheets together to kind of pull together data into a master system to give this revenue number. And so I'm working Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and on the following Monday was the call. So I met with basically the CFO and the CEO and said, this is the services call for this month and for the next 3 months, and then kind of start that process over again. So their goal obviously was to make the call as much as close to actual as possible. So it takes a lot of time and effort to do that, right? And especially if you're doing it manually.
And essentially here, Matt, as you did that report here, all of that data is kind of out of sync here because you were looking in the rearview mirror, right? So then you'd start your process
Exactly.
all over again, right?
Once you write it down, it's out of date already, right? Because things change all the time. You know that. So, especially if you're like a 2 week cycle, after
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks, that number is not accurate anymore, right? So what's the accuracy differential is the big thing. It could be 8%, 10%, it could be 1%, and that's one of the things you kind of got to manage and massage as you kind of go through this process. Whereas if you had like a centralized tool or things like that, that data is more real time. So if you look at a Monday, look at a Friday, it could be different numbers, but it's based on different activities that are happening in the system, for example. So the cost of getting it wrong. So there's actually a lot of costs of getting it wrong. So not only impactful hiring plans, looking at capacity. So you expect to have a number of resources available or not available based on the number of project loads you have, or kind of how projects kind of map out in your organization. You know, missed revenue targets, which is the biggest issue for me. Basically, you couldn't miss revenue targets. If you did, then it took a lot of explaining to do, right? So basically, a lot of why did this happen and how can we prevent it in the future? What can we do to be better, right? And things like that. A lot of questions. And then from a financial perspective, cash flow surprises and margin erosion, right? So understanding, you know, when cash comes to an organization, when it's available, is important to all organizations, but I think it's probably more important to smaller organizations than maybe larger organizations that have credit facilities, things like that to do. But for example, we're a smaller organization, and so understanding my predicting my cash flow is really important for me because I have to pay bills, things like that. So understanding when this cash reserves are kind of going to come in are really important. Margin erosion is really important too, because under kind of giving a view in the future of, do you expect this project to end up on time? Are you putting more time and effort into than you expected to really kind of understand, are you hitting the profitability kind of metrics and targets that you're looking for? And that's really important, again, from a project management organization to kind of know those things and know those things a bit early, right? Before they and become more proactive versus always having to be reactive. So what does good look like? So, you know, real-time data is really important, right? So basically, if you have a system where you put all the data in, you log updates, you put time in, you process changes to your project as they kind of occur, then as I mentioned to Kyle, when you click on that dashboard and look at your revenue, you always kind of have an up-to-date picture of where your revenue is going to be. Now, it is predicated that people use this and put data in the system correctly, but as you kind of put a system in place and go through change management, keep people onboarding using it, then the accuracy of the data becomes better and better. One source of truth, right, which is really important, so you're not looking at different systems to get different and get different pictures. And lastly, I think from an executive insights perspective, it's really easy to set up a dashboard or reports, et cetera, in these systems. So executives can self-serve rather than having you always kind of put things together or have a meeting, right, to understand where your picture is from a revenue perspective. We worked with a client a little while ago that when we first engaged with them, they were experiencing about an 8% difference. So 8% difference in revenue forecast versus actual, which may seem low, but if you're running multi, 25, $30 million service organization, that's pretty large, right? And so they're constantly kind of behind the curve, not constantly being reactive and explaining what happened and kind of trying to figure out how they can get better. So we implemented a PSA tool for them, and they got immediately down to 3% difference between actual and forecasted, which is a huge difference, 5%, right? So, but even 3% again is pretty large for that scale. After a while, the product kind of got baked in the organization. Users start using it. They got more familiar with it and things like that. And they kind of matured in the use of their PSA tool. Now it's 1%. So going from 8% to 1% is a game changer for our organization, right? Because they can be more predictable on their revenue and cash flow. So that's something I see common when we work with organizations that look at their processes and look at implementing a tool like a PSA tool or a Monday.com tool, for example, that they see as they mature and use the tool and implement it correctly, they start seeing benefits. They start seeing benefits in their revenue forecasting, seeing benefits in projects on time, maybe identification of risk earlier, et cetera. So there's a lot of things these tools can do to really kind of give you the proactive feel, right? So you're not always reactive. And I've been a PM for a long time. I know PM is very reactive sometimes, and sometimes firefighting. But if you can limit that, to 80% of the time projects are going okay, and only 20% you're firefighting or kind of dealing with reactive issues, then that's going to save you time and hopefully make you better. So kind of as you go through this process, you kind of got to understand where you're at currently. So if you're stuck in Excel, right? So moving from Excel to like a PSA tool overnight, it's not really the best thing to do, right? It's kind of a bit of a journey. I used to do a lot of PMO, project management maturity assessments for companies. And if you look at the project management maturity model, there's all these different categories. It's like 1 to 5, for example. And so 1 is like basic and 5 is optimized. So looking at an organization and talking to them about their project management needs and what they're trying to do is maybe they don't need to be 5 optimized in every category. Maybe 3 is okay for them, or maybe 2 is okay for them, right? Based on what they're trying to do, and what their organization's like and what their budget's like, things like that. So very similar model and kind of looking at how your forecasting maturity is and what you're doing is you can't expect to go from basic or kind of ad hoc with using Excel to optimized overnight. It's a bit of a journey. And you want to take that journey because there's steps, like baby steps, right? So first you got to look at the different types of data you have that you can pull together that you need to kind of generate your forecast. What the forecast type is, what your source data is, what your tools are, what your roles and cadences. Just like anything else, it's good to put like roles and responsibilities or kind of a RACI put together to kind of understand who owns what piece of it, so there's no confusion. Also, revenue may be one of those things that's kind of more standardized. However, all organizations kind of have their little, um, you know, bespokeness or kind of differences, things like that, and how they do things. So you kind of really kind of align with your executive team or management team to kind of understand, what data they're looking for, what's important to them. So you kind of pull that into your framework. Um, I'd say common pitfalls are trying to go too fast, too soon, too much data, wrong cadence, unclear ownership, right? So basically, how can you streamline this to make it a quick process for you? But it's a process you can trust, right? So you have clear owners, you have clear data sources, you can trust the data, your users are putting the data in the system correctly, things like that. Those are all important things you're going to look at. And that's why it's important, like I said, to take baby steps, because you kind of want to go through like do step 1 and then kind of reevaluate it, look at it. Is this the right step for us? Is it making sense? Do people understand the process? How can I make it better? And then go to step 2 and go through the same process. It's kind of iterative learning. Because last thing you want to do is put a process in place that's onerous, right? That people think it's, it doesn't make sense and they don't buy into it as well. So you kind of have to go through that process to really kind of understand how forecasting works for you and your organization. So what we did as an organization is we looked at the marketplace, right? And so we saw a lot of our customers are using the CWM tools, the collaborative work management tools for work management, collaboration, things like that, and being successful at it. The user interface is really strong. People can get into a lot of training, a lot of change management, and kind of understand how it works, just by clicking buttons, things like that. And so um, those tools, like I said, have a lot of capabilities, really good for that focus on task management, but they may not have a lot of strong capabilities on revenue recognition or things like that, or maybe timekeeping or other features that some of the bigger tools have. On the other hand, what we're seeing is a lot of organizations using the big enterprise tools that they're trying to they're implementing a tool that's complex, so it takes a long time, right? It's not a 4-week implementation, it's not a 4-day implementation, it's a 6-month implementation, and they're typically configuring the system for their industry or use case, so it becomes a bit more complicated. And so, I'm sure a lot of you have used tools like SAP, for example. The user interface isn't as pretty as like a Monday.com or a ClickUp is, and it's not exactly as user friendly as well, but it has capabilities that some organizations need. So the gap we saw is that cloud work management tools, again, have the user interface, which is really friendly, lower costs, and you have the bigger tools that are kind of more enterprise and more complicated at higher cost. And so there's nothing in between. So what if you're a service organization like us? So you're 100 people, you're $25 million. You can't afford some of these more expensive tools because they're expensive from a licensing cost. But the CWM tools kind of not working for you anymore. You kind of outgrew it. And what we saw was the opportunity to kind of look at Monday, which is one of our partners, and kind of add a layer on top of it that helps with revenue recognition. So what we've done is to kind of take the native Monday feel and look that people are used to, for example, and that they are easy to use, and kind of added functionality on top of it that kind of helps with the revenue forecasting. Um, So we try to make it as simple as possible, right? So right now it's basically just forecasted revenue and actual revenue. We do real-time time tracking based on native based timekeeping. Um, we are able to do dynamic reforecasting, and we also are able to support different contracts types like T&M, fixed price, and fixed price milestone. There's reporting through Power BI and ways that you can really kind of add on to it to make it more kind of integrated and useful to your system. It can be part of a more kind of integrated tool set. So basically, we can intake projects through a form, through Monday CRM, through Salesforce, for example, and then kind of go through the process of managing the project in the tool, managing revenue in the tool, and then maybe connect with a system like QuickBooks or something like that to do the output and do the invoicing. So it can be a full lifecycle tool for you, which I know a lot of organizations are looking for as they kind of go through tool rationalization for their tech stack, but also from a user perspective, right? So a user doesn't want to have to use 10 different tools in their day to get their job done. They want to use as many minimal as possible. And so if you can tie all the systems into one kind of workflow that's pretty streamlined, it makes it easier for them to do the job. So we're going to run into a quick demo. Let me just share my screen here. So we're going to go through a guided demo here. And so basically, this is the view of Monday Work Management where this Monday PSA solution lives in. And so we're using a portfolio object, which kind of gives you the opportunity to manage different projects and kind of get a roll up of data, right? So basically, you'll see, projects in your portfolio, risks, issues, their status, things like that. So it kind of rolls up to give you a nice view of the different projects in your portfolio. So right now, we're going to go basically manually add a project. And so we can do that, creating a project and basically defining the project name and then picking a template. So, it's a really powerful process within Monday to create different templates for different types of projects. And so you'll see we have a fixed fee milestone project and a rapid deployment project. And so we're going to click rapid deployment project and click create project. And this is going to create a project within our portfolio. And when it does this, it also creates a project over here. So you'll basically see that it creates the project details, which is kind of the board where you manage your work, right? So that's basically where you have the tasks, you have the assignments, you have your timekeeping, you have your collaboration as well. So up here back in the portfolio board, there's a few things we need to put in here to make this process work. So the first thing we need to do is add an owner. I'm going to do that. We'll add myself. We'll add a start date. We'll add a planned effort, and this is in hours. We'll add a planned duration, and this is in days. And then we'll do a planned revenue, and this is in dollars. And so what you'll see, and the last thing right here, we'll have a contract type. We'll just pick fixed fee milestone, for example, or time materials. So what you'll see, first of all, is the planned timeline automatically updates. So it takes the start date plus duration, and it gives you more of a planned timeline. Next, what we'll do is we'll click on forecast. And what this is going to do is going to take the information and that you add in the duration, the revenue, and the effort, and kind of give you an idea of what the forecast is on a time phase basis. We'll go there for a second. If you had selected fixed fee milestone as a contract, basically it's a template and an automation. It creates the milestones for you, which you can define the revenue and the start date and any notes for each milestone under that project. But we'll go back to our time materials projects. Now we'll look at the forecasted revenue screen. And as I mentioned, what it's doing is it's taking the planned revenue, the planned duration, the planned effort, and calculating that revenue on a month-by-month basis. So there are some smarts behind it. So basically, it looks at working days. So for example, September, which is a good example, Monday the 1st is a holiday for those in the US. So instead of 22 working days in September, there's only 21 working days. So what the system does, it does calculate that and take that into account. So it takes that. So September only has 21 work days. October has 20 working days, whatever it is, and it calculates the data based on those numbers. So it takes working days, for example, into account. Also takes typical U.S. holidays, which you can modify too if your organization is a bit different. So what's key here, which is not native Monday functionality, is the time phased reporting, right? So basically, you'll see here that we have revenue for this project now over March and April, and that's something that we basically use in a kind of outside system to do calculations and push the numbers back into Monday. You will typically see time phased in like a PSA solution or a multi-enterprise kind of SPM solution. But this is something again that we put on top of Monday because the Monday platform is pretty customizable and user friendly. So now we have a forecasted revenue to understand what our revenue is going to be the rest of 2025. So what do we do with actual revenue? So actual revenue is based on timesheets. And there's different ways in the system you can do timesheets. So right now you'll see there's no actual revenue for Biogen Genetics because we have no timesheets. So what we'll do is we'll look at how timesheets work. But before that, as I mentioned before, there's the ability to reforecast. So what if, for example, one of your main data points change, your start date changes, your effort changes, etc. You can go here back to your portfolio and change that data point in the system, and then basically change, like we're going to change the start date, and then we'll change we'll click reforecast. And so what we'll do is update those numbers. So you can reforecast things and changing. So that's really important for most organizations. It doesn't always plan out or pan out as you expect when you initially create the project. It could be things that, the timeline changes is a big one, right? Steps based on resource availability or customer availability. So you need the ability to kind of reforecast data to get accurate metrics going forward. So now you'll see that we reforecast the data has changed in our reforecast board. So next we're going to go into our project, and we'll see that we have different tasks here, right? So basically there's a few tasks in our project plan that are billable, that we'll mark as billable. So we'll assign an owner to them. We'll assign an owner to the kickoff meeting, and we'll make it billable. We'll assign an owner to user acceptance testing and make that billable. And then we'll assign an owner to post-go live support and make that billable. So what this is going to do is it's going to take the billable entries and basically duplicate them to a timesheet board. And the reason why we did that is because if you're working multiple projects, so you don't have to go into each project and put time at each project. You have one place, one board you can put time towards. And the timesheet board is great because you can filter it to you. So basically this view is just the tasks and the projects I'm assigned to that I can put time towards. It doesn't show me the tasks assignments that John Smith's assigned to or Kyle's assigned to, for example. So it kind of really customized view per person. So I can go here now, basically enter time. I click on the enter time button. I put my time in, add it manually. And now my time is in the system. So what's happening now is the system is capturing that time using the rate that it calculates from planned effort and revenue. It calculates actual revenue for that resource on that project for March. So as you enter other time entries, it basically does a calculation real time to give you an idea of what your actual revenue is. Now, to note, this is Monday native timekeeping. We've also built this to use some apps. So in the Monday App Store, they have an app called Track It and other time apps as well. And so we can integrate this with other applications like Track It, which give you a little bit more advanced timekeeping functionality than a native timekeeping functionality does within Monday. Like for example, approvals isn't something that Monday native timekeeping can do, but these apps can do. So great. Now we have forecasted revenue in our system. Now we have actual revenue in our system. So how do we see that, right? So instead of going into the boards, we have the ability to kind of pull up a dashboard. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a Power BI dashboard. So basically we're pulling data out of Monday, pushing into Power BI and pushing that Power BI dashboard data back into Monday. And the reason, again, we did this is because Monday can't do the time phase at the moment, right? That's something that's in their plan, in the roadmap in the future. But native Monday dashboards would not be able to do the time phase reporting we needed to see the actual versus forecasted revenue. And so what you'll see here is we have a kind of a 2-tab Power BI sheet where we can see a few things. We can see the health. We can see forecast versus actual per project, and it's drillable. And so basically you can drill into one of these projects to kind of see the data more granularly to what you're really kind of focused on. And the idea of these dashboards is, again, to kind of give you the view of what's wrong, right? So the 80-20 rule is something really important for how I manage things. It's like 80% of the time, you don't have to worry about it because things going okay. Let me know about the 20% of the stuff I do need to worry about. And the idea is to help you kind of allocate or kind of quickly identify the areas you need to focus on, right? So for example, a project may go on for 6 months and you have a lot of your actual revenue is higher in the first few months than you forecasted. why, right? So you kind of dig into it. Is the project going quicker than expected? Are you more effort at the beginning than expected? And you kind of dig into it, and that's kind of back to where the proactiveness is coming through, right? So you can spot the problem before the problem happens and deal with it. One of the biggest challenges I used to run into when I did, again, revenue forecasting for organization is having to back out revenue because we recognize too much revenue at the beginning, and that's really painful, right? So when you're backing out revenue, you have a negative, and then you have to explain that in your revenue call. That's not a fun conversation to have. So again, being proactive and kind of understanding the issues before they happen is really important. So look, we have a graph, we have a table. So again, this data is drillable, so you can actually see the data in different ways that are important to you. And then you'll see that with this kind of the tab 2, where we have kind of a chart, right, and kind of a summary. So again, these dashboards are very customizable because they're Power BI and the data is in the system. So we can customize these dashboards to, again, something that works for you. A lot of organizations work with kind of already have processes, already have dashboards that they use based on their revenue process. So one of the goals that we work through when we work with people is we don't want to wholesale change your processes, right? That's bad. Changing your processes and going to a new tool is kind of a recipe for disaster. So we kind of work with you to understand how you work and kind of what makes sense for your organization and kind of replicate that as much as possible within the tool. So there's not a huge gap between what you did and what you're going to do. So I hope that gave you kind of a feel of what we did with Monday.com. And like I said, it's kind of a product that's kind of going through transition. So right now it's focused on revenue, forecasted revenue, and actual revenue. Our next kind of update is focused on cost, right? So basically cost and price cards, right? So basically line cards for rates and utilization and margins, right? Which is another kind of key pieces of what you track in a professional service organization. So that will give you some of the capabilities that, again, some of the stronger or more expensive tools have, and a platform that really makes sense for you.
And so Matt, just a question here. So, based on your experience in the project portfolio services space, have you noticed a clear gap in the functionality that some of the legacy platforms offer, and that's why you built this here on Monday, as you saw a potential gap in the market here that we were able to capitalize on?
Yeah, so we're seeing this two ways. The first way is that people purchase a tool like Monday or ClickUp or Smartsheet or Trello, whatever, and use that for work management. But because those tools can't support the time phase revenue forecasting, they still use Excel on the side. So now they're
Hmm.
using two tools, right, to manage the system again, which is less effective. On the other side of the picture, they purchase tools like Planview or Cantata or Reiki, for example, which are much more, like I said, complicated and configurable systems. But what we're seeing there is that it can be too complicated to use. So people are using what they need to use in the system and still using spreadsheets on the side because they're used to spreadsheets and know how to use them. So what we see is a gap is that, so if you're using like one of these more enterprise SPM systems, and my boss says you need to have this data in the system every week, what I do is I calculate in Excel, copy and paste it into Cantata, for example, just so I meet my metrics and my boss is asking for. But
Hmm.
I'm not using the system because I don't want to use it, I don't know how to use it, or no one's I really don't understand why the system is going to make my life easier, right? Which is important for me as a PM.
Gotcha. Now, and that's an interesting story that regardless of the solution that you're using today, there's still revenue recognition or financial related challenges here that, as we all know, we revert back to Excel and then bring that information forward, right? So, it's creating gaps in visibility from a leadership perspective here when you do it in Excel versus the solution. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think Excel is pretty powerful, or
Hmm.
Google Sheets, or however you want to use it, and it's easy to use because we all kind of used it. The problem is it's two-dimensional, right? So it's flat. So it's not, everybody has their own spreadsheet. There's no collaboration in it, and like I said, the minute you enter data in the system, it's sort of out of date, right? So using it actually, I think, hurts you more than helps you, right? Because you don't always have a good view of what's happening in your projects, for example, or your organization. But if everybody updated their Monday.com every day with their tasks and what's done and their time and things like that, then every day, at the end of the day, you can run your dashboard and see what's changed or what the status is. And if
Yeah.
yesterday you're expecting 50 million and now you're expecting 48 million, you can go, wow, I need to look into that and figure out what the situation is before it gets worse, or
Yep.
is it a mistake, right? And so I'm not waiting until day 30 in a month, and now I'm 48 million against a $50 million number, and you're already screwed. What are you gonna do about it, right? It's kind of too late in the game.
Yeah. Well, it's visibility in real time versus going through that manual process here of aggregating all of that information up, presenting it, and then that data being out of sync here from what's actually going on. So it's very interesting there. And thank you for kind of walking us through this process.
I appreciate it, and I just wanted to kind of, before we wrap up, I want to talk about change management because that's a big piece of it. So we've done a lot of these implementations, 1,700 implementations over 7 years. And the biggest thing that we see things the implementations fail is because we're not training appropriately, or we're not going through change management process appropriately, right? So basically an organization purchased like a Monday or a ClickUp or Planview, et cetera, and then spends money on licenses, which is a big piece of it, but doesn't spend so much money on the implementation of it. They kind of go cheaper there, right? And so you kind of throw it in, you get something working, kind of force people to use it, kind of top-down approach. People don't buy into it, people don't use it, and then 6 months later, the data is not accurate, and you're like, Planview doesn't work for us anymore. Let's go to Cantata, and then it goes to a cycle. And I've seen this cycle like countless times where people use a tool for a year and it doesn't work for them anymore. So they go to another tool and it works good for them for 3 months. It doesn't work for them for a year. It's a cycle, and the cycle, the common theme of the cycle is the organization. It's not the tool, right? The tool can work just
Yeah.
fine if you implement it correctly. So the organization isn't investing correctly, isn't managing change management correctly, isn't doing training correctly to make these tools sticky. And the problem is that every time you go through this process, it's expensive. So especially if you do the RFP process, for example, RFP processes are crazy expensive and time intensive to do. So you're looking at a tool, picking the right tool, you're implementing the tool, you're migrating data to the tool, you're training for the tool, and then 6 months later, you're doing that again and again. That's a crazy cost that you're incurring as an organization, not only from a financial perspective, but from a user perspective and data integrity perspective and things like that. And those are things you kind of look for as you're doing this. And so that's why a lot of CWM tools are seeing a lot of traction right now, because the usability is easier. But
Yep.
the same trap happens. You use it for 3 months, people are excited about it, and they stop using it because something changed, or they don't understand it again, or the training is not consistent, and they go back to spreadsheets. And then after 6 months, your CEO's going, "That doesn't work for us anymore. Finding us another solution." And it's a bad trap to be in, and it's a trap we can help you get out of, right? Because we can help get things back on track, but I think you have to also identify your organization is kind of making this problem yourself, rather than the tool being a problem, always been a problem.
Yeah. Change management's kind of key. I think we talked about that earlier today with time tracking and things like that. So, um, do you feel that it's important that when an organization is selecting solutions like this, that they understand their process, the technology, and their people, and kind of try to marry those three worlds here as they go through this? What would be a good recommendation here for the community that we're talking to right now?
That's a big piece of it, but you also have to understand, if you have onerous complex processes, there's still going to be onerous complex processes in the tool, right?
Yep.
I also tell people that if you have trash processes, the tool's not going to make them better, right? So it's just a
Yeah.
tool. So kind of looking at what you're doing as an organization doesn't make sense, right? So a lot of times PMOs are seen as blockers in business.
Hmm.
I was just talking to someone the other day that their organization got rid of their PMO because I don't remember what they call it. It was they used a different word for P, but basically said that their PMO was always like, no, was always blocking, was not enabling their business, was always kind of um, a, a, a stop for them trying to get things done. So they just got rid of it, right? So a lot of times organizations, PMOs are seen as blockers. And so we can fix that, right? So we can fix that in the system by maybe making our process a little bit less onerous. Do we need 10 approval gates or things like that, for example, to get a project started? And you can kind of go through that process as you implement the tool and kind of put a new process, a new kind of a process in place. I think that's key. Um, the other thing is, I would say that it's important to take baby steps, right? So you might want these 100 things, right? But day one, do you need those 100 things? Maybe put 10 things in place and kind of let
Yeah.
that bake in and mature and get people used to it. And then a few months later, maybe add a few more things and kind of grow it and mature it that way. And what's kind of cool about that is I worked with a company that did that, which really good at it. And then the user's saying, I really wish the system could do that. And they say it can, and they do it for them. And the user's like, oh my God, IT is great. They're really helping me because they give me what I need quickly. But because they took that kind of planned approach, it got really drove adoption because people were pretty excited about it when changes or new functionality came into the system. Um, and I guess that's a second biggest reason why these things fail is you start too big at first, right? We always try to do like an MVP, minimum viable product. What's the minimum you need having your system to get you start getting buying and start people using it.
Yep, crawl, walk, run. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So cool. So basically, you're not alone, right? So this is a situation and something I see a lot of people talk about. I look at Reddit groups, I look at Facebook, for example, or LinkedIn. These are challenges that everybody has. So I recommend talking to your PMI chapters. I recommend looking at like I said, some of those social media like LinkedIn or Reddit as well. There's lots of links out there as well. We're always here to help you, right? So I have a LinkedIn newsletter called PMO Off the Record, which is free, obviously, and that you can look at, kind of tackling the challenges that PMO leaders and operations leaders have these days with different things like resource management, revenue recognition, capacity, strategy to goals, things like that. So things are relevant and interesting to the people in this marketplace. And then you can also reach out to Kyle. Kyle will be happy to chat with you for a 30-minute conversation to see what you're doing, how we can help, or how you can help yourself, and kind of get you on the right way. Although we're a consulting company, our really big focus of ours is education and advancing the profession, right? So we want project managers to be successful. We want projects to be successful because it helps all of us. So we're willing to do that with things like this and our free education on YouTube and things like that. So definitely use those resources from us. Kyle?
Perfect. And on that note here, I think as we're getting closer to wrapping up, I didn't see many questions here coming through the chat. By all means, feel free to reach out, have a 30-minute discussion with me. I do like to have those types of conversations here and see kind of where partnership happens, and if anything, how we can best support you and your organization as we go through this process. I will say that on our website here, we have a series of webinars here that we're doing through the end of the year. As Matt said here, we lead through education, and so we have quite a few topics here that we discuss. I believe we have a demo day coming up as well across all the products here that we have partnerships with. And if it does warrant a conversation, I'm based in Pacific Standard Time Zone, so definitely feel free to save that link here to my Calendly and connect with me on LinkedIn as we go through this. Matt and I both will be reaching out to everyone here periodically. And again, want to thank you all here for the time spent. Again, Matt here, I didn't really see any questions coming through the chat, so I'm a big fan of giving everybody time back in their day.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks everybody for joining. I appreciate it. Take care.